Thank you for joining us again this morning on the Morning Call. Polls have closed and counting is now underway in Zimbabwe following Monday's general elections. Millions of Zimbabweans waited in line for hours to cast their votes in a historic election that for the first time did not have longtime ruler President Robert Mugabe on the ballot. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission has put the voter turnout as high as 75% in some areas.
The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission on Monday said it reported the presidential candidates of the two main political parties for suspected violation of the Electoral Act. The reported candidates are ZANU-PF's Emmerson Mnangagwa and the MDC Alliance's Nelson Chamisa. The Commission's chairperson, Justice Priscilla Chigumba, addressed journalists in Harare.
The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission notes with concern continued violations of the Electoral Act by candidates contesting the 2018 harmonized elections. On 29 July 2018, at least 2 of the presidential candidates gave statements which were published in the news media which might be interpreted as campaigning. These matters have been referred to the attention of the police for investigation as to whether or not the Electoral Act and/or the Electoral Code of Conduct may have been violated.
Stung by rejection by his predecessor Mugabe, who told journalists on Sunday that he wasn't going to vote for Mnangagwa, but rather for opposition leader Chamisa, Mnangagwa released a video on Sunday evening imploring Zimbabweans to reject the comeback of his former boss.
It's a great moment for...
The MDC Alliance presidential candidate also held a press conference on the eve of the elections. Chigumba said the commission could only take action after full investigations.
And for Zimbabweans, this is a historic moment. Under the reign of Robert Mugabe, the elections were still marred by suspicions of fraud. But on Monday, voters went to the polls in their numbers to choose their next leader of all the 23 candidates. Some even voted for the first time in their lives. It's the case of this voter. Take a look.
Zimbabweans voted en masse and calmly on Monday in the first general elections since the fall of President Robert Mugabe in November after 37 years in power. For citizens like Tiombongwa, who voted for the very first time in Harare, whoever wins, their voice will finally be heard.
Because I've never felt my vote was going to be listened to or heard. So this time around, I feel like it is going to be heard. But like as a voter, it feels like it feels more transparent. So I'm casting my vote and feeling my vote is being heard now than it has been rigged before, probably. I don't know. But like it feels more transparent.
The Electoral Commission said the voter turnout was high in an exercise held in a climate of suspicion of fraud. According to opinion polls, the race for the highest office is between the current head of state, Emmerson Mnangagwa, and opposition leader Nelson Chamisa of the Movement for Democratic Change.
Africanews journalist Nyasha Mtizwa is from Zimbabwe, and she has been following up on the polls with our men on the ground in Zimbabwe, and she is with us now in the studio to share with us some insights on the elections, a historic election, I must say.
Absolutely.
Good morning, Nyasha. How are you?
I'm very well, Jerry. Very excited Zimbabwean this morning.
On imagine que vous êtes très contente pour ces élections.
We're very happy for this election.
Very happy, very excited.
We're glad to have you with us. Now, as observers have described it, the election recorded a huge turnout. Does this in any way signal that change has come to Zimbabwe?
Well, the exercise we saw yesterday was fundamentally different from the last 2 exercises that we witnessed under Robert Mugabe. For the first time since 2002, we had international observers, and I think this is the reason behind the calm and the fact that the election process went so well. This is a big stakes election, so for the campaign to have happened and for the actual voting day to have come and it was not marred by any violence, I think it's a good indication, and And it also shows that, you know, something that Zimbabweans can be surprised by. In 2008, the election was so violent that it inspired a lot of fear in the ordinary Zimbabwean. ZANU-PF sent their youth wingers to terrorize the MDC strongholds. So that was in 2008. And then in 2013, even though there was less state-sponsored violence, we still saw a lot of vote buying, a lot of vote rigging. So it's something that has been of concern, and I think the ruling party largely refrained from major incidents this time around because they're trying to show that Zimbabwe has moved on from Robert Mugabe. But of course, the conduct of the Electoral Commission has been brought into question severely, especially by the opposition.
And how are the numbers coming up so far, Nyasha?
It's still pretty hard to get a concrete picture of how the results are panning out, but as of last night, as of midnight last night, Nelson Chamisa was leading in Harare. Of course, this is something that's expected because traditionally Harare is the stronghold of the opposition. Yes, absolutely. And then Emerson Mnangagwa was leading in rural Zimbabwe, also something that is expected. But of course, I think we'll have a more accurate picture right as Tuesday progresses. I think the Electoral Commission are also under a little bit of pressure. So, of course, we will be hearing from Priscilla Chigumba as well. That said, the Commission has up to 5 days to give a final result. So they are likely to take their time on this one. But, of course, we kind of expect the candidates to come up with their own tallies of what they think the results may be.
Okay, so you're right there, Nyasha, though, at the end of the day, the official result is what will matter.
Of course.
But now, specifically in Harare, which you just mentioned, which you said is the stronghold of the opposition, what's been the reaction from the voters there?
So the voters were really energetic, Jerry, especially the young ones, the ones that were voting for the first time. I mean, for the first time in many years, many believed that it was possible to change Zimbabwe through the ballot and that they could take their power back to determine the future of their country. So they were ecstatic. Many began lining to vote long before polling centers opened, and they enjoyed the sun and long lines because a lot of areas were gridlocked. But of course, this shows how much hope has been inspired by this exercise, especially among the youth. And they were voting for things that affect them: jobs, corruption, social services, and many stayed up late, of course, at the polling stations. They wanted to witness the vote counting. They believe that a Chamisa victory is possible, and they want to guard it.
I can imagine. Now, we have to hold it there for now and come back to you. It's a special we are doing on Zimbabwe today on the program. I'd like to thank you. Still, we'll come back to you.
Yes, Nyasha will still stay with us, but first we have to get some of the stories in other parts of the African continent.